Hi, I'm Mina Chang, and I serve as the CEO for Linking the World. I'm here in Mogadishu, the capital of Somalia, and I realize it's a city that's been torn apart by over 2 decades of war. Most NGOs and companies have pulled out of here, security contractors have pulled out, and United Nations personnel and compound are constantly targeted and attacked. So that should give you a glimpse of how unstable and violent the environment is. In 1990, this country fell into a brutal civil war, and the conflict was exacerbated by frequent droughts, and it led to extreme hunger and economic collapse. And this created a perpetual cycle of insecurity and poverty. A second phase of war and violence started as recently as 2007 between a number of armed groups, and this led to the rise in power of Al-Shabaab, as we know, one of the most brutal terror groups in the world. The Somali people here didn't support their ideology as they were pledging allegiance to the global jihadist movement, but Al-Shabaab controlled large regions of land and they'd kill anyone who opposed Sharia law. And because of the lack of meaningful choices afforded to an average Somali, Al-Shabaab was able to spread through the region. This country has now become a major training ground for terrorists, and many attacks have been launched from here, including the Westgate Mall massacre in Nairobi, Kenya, and the murders last year of over 147 college students at Garissa. The fight against terrorism here is being led by Somali forces and AMISOM, which is a force made up of soldiers from African nations, but Al-Shabaab still maintain control over much of this region. It's important to note that even though military forces are taking on key territory, Al-Shabaab is quickly evolving. Their model makes it harder for conventional forces to counter, and the terror group is deploying targeted assassinations, suicide attacks, and kidnappings. And they're also using another very powerful weapon, which is fear. Just since I've been here this week, there have been a number of targeted attacks killing many people. People here are living under utter fear for their lives, and no one's safe. Just last year, over 5 members of parliament have been murdered. The presidential palace is attacked constantly. Just this morning, they were murdered again. There are public executions of including children. Foreigners are targeted and gunned down, and especially aid workers are not safe here. Last year alone, there were over 140 attacks that were recorded. It's also well known that this group is using access to the schools here for recruiting. They do things like distribute jihadist booklets, and they'll punish any teacher that resists. I remember the last time I was here, working in the camps where Linking the World supported refugees, and that's when I realized that these innocent families were running for their lives, running from the very element that we are fighting, and that is violent extremism. I met a little boy who lived in a poor village that was attacked. He was found clinging to his mother's corpse. He couldn't speak. He was too weak and shocked, too weak to stand. He survived and he's alive, but we know that's not truly living. This child had nothing but his mother's love. Now he'd lost that too. As I left the camp, I wondered what this boy's worldview would be as he grew up. Would he be given an opportunity to fulfill his potential and contribute back to his community? Or would he find himself growing up angry, desperate, with a lack of meaningful choices? He may be given a choice one day, and that choice might be to take up a weapon just to be able to feed his family. The desperation of extreme poverty creates a vacuum that acts not as a creator of, but as fuel, an enabler for violent extremism to spread. Extremists prey on those that are trapped in extreme poverty, using them and their communities as training grounds, recruiting grounds, harbor sites, and logistic spaces. And these groups They provide basic development aid, food aid, clinics, and schools. It's often the only choice that families have to meet their basic needs, and what they're doing is a lot of work that wins hearts and minds. So if this is true, then these terror groups are like our biggest competitor. The growth of these groups lead to the furthering of the strength of al-Shabaab, and as they grow and pledge allegiance to groups like as they have to Al-Qaeda and ISIS, so does their reach and ability to inspire and recruit all around the world. And this is just the implication on national security and global security. So think of the economic imperative. So why focus on the Somali boy? Why care about meaningful choices for him and for many others trapped in the cycle of extreme poverty? The answer goes beyond our desire to alleviate human suffering and injustice. If left unchecked, the asymmetric threat of violent extremism will eventually affect all of us, hitting us at home, directly impacting our own ability to make meaningful choices. More coordination, stabilization efforts are needed. Military action must be taken simultaneous to sustainable development operations, which means it has to be conducted before, during, and after kinetic intervention in order to give people real alternatives. Linking the World has been helping lead these stabilization efforts, and in the past, we've been working with refugees that are fleeing al-Shabaab militants. Through that experience, we've learned about the complexities of working here in Somalia, and now with Linking the World's new model, we'll be able to more accurately target the primary causes of instability. We can then co-create highly effective programs that eliminate those contributors and mitigate causes of instability, enabling military gains in the fight against al-Shabaab to be more impactful and lasting. We have to work together to prevent conditions that violent extremist groups actively exploit. We know we can't fight extremist ideology with military power alone. Truly halting the rise of violent extremism and alleviating suffering in a sustainable way requires us to put ourselves in that Somali boy's shoes. It requires us to look through his eyes at the challenges that he'll face in the coming years. And it'll require us to help by creating an environment through proactive, coordinated stabilization efforts so that he and every other human being devoid of hope and choices simply because of where he or she was born has the freedom and the right to make lasting, meaningful choices for himself and his family, resilient with the ability to choose an alternative path to a better life and ultimately a more hopeful shared future.